Welcome to the Deep Dive, brought to you by Reformed Thinking. Today we're opening up a topic that, well, it really gets to the heart of how the gospel is delivered. We're asking whether piety and architecture can ever really coexist peacefully.
That's a good way to put it.
Our source material for this is a surprisingly witty and very detailed look at open-air preaching. It examines its necessity, its style, and its unique effectiveness.
And it sets all of that against a really sharp critique of traditional church architecture.
It does. It basically asks point blank whether Christians have started to prioritize, expensive stone over reachable souls.
Absolutely. And our mission for you, the listener, is to really dissect the practical and spiritual logic here. The logic that compels ministry to, well, abandon the comfort and security of an established building.
So we're distilling the rationale for leaving the chapel.
Yeah, for pursuing the street. We're looking at the actual mechanics of reaching people who have either excluded themselves or, have been excluded by the fixed location of a religious assembly.
And the whole thing starts with this powerful paradox, doesn't it?
It does. It's the framing for the entire argument.
Why is it that the very act of preaching outside the walls requires, and this is a quote, no sort of defense whatever?
It needs no justification.
Right. But any service held inside a building needs very potent arguments and, frankly, an apology just to excuse its existence.
And that paradox, it tells you everything you need to know about the author's point of view.
How so?
The open air, which they call the Heavenly Father's vast audience chamber, is seen as the natural, the default setting for proclaiming the gospel.
And the building, the institution, that's the deviation.
That is the deviation that has to be justified. So today we're looking at the spiritual, the structural, and even the logistical flaws that, in the author's view, make the traditional church building just inherently less effective than a common street corner.
Okay, so let's start with that rationale, the mandate for open-air ministry.
So when we begin with the why, the entire exercise is really based on one single overriding measurable success.
And what's that?
The documents define the great benefit of open-air preaching as getting so many newcomers to hear the gospel who otherwise would never hear it.
So it's all about access.
It's all about access. If ministry isn't reaching the unreached, then its methods, its structures, they need a very serious inspection.
That access, reaching the newcomer,
Yeah.
it has to be the ruling priority. And this connects directly to what the source material argues is a massive and extremely common misinterpretation of the New Testament mandate.
It does. The true command, go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature, has, over generations, suffered a subtle but lethal corruption.
Lethal is a strong word.
Well, the change is simple, but the scope is catastrophic. The writers observe that many Christians act as if the command was rewritten to say, go into your own place of worship and preach the gospel to the few creatures who will come inside.
That switch, it turns an active marching command into a passive, sedentary invitation.
It does, and it severely curtails the obedience that the commission requires.
It changes the entire posture of the church, doesn't it?
Completely. It shifts ministry from a seeking agent to a stationary receiver.
And this passivity, it just becomes indefensible when you look at the parables. The instruction, go ye into the highways and hedges and compel them to come in, is presented as something to be taken. Well, very literally.
Yeah, following that physical instruction, actually going to the hedges, is seen as the best possible way to carry out the essential meaning of the command.
It speaks to this absolute necessity of pursuit.
It does. We have to understand that true evangelism requires the pursuit of living stones for the kingdom. We have to stop preaching, as the author says, on and on to empty pews and musty hassocks.
Those uncomfortable, dusty cushions that you see in a formal, sparsely attended service.
Right. The mission just can't wait for the audience to arrive.
And to make this point perfectly clear, this source uses an analogy that is incredibly sharp and practical. It draws from secular life.
It does. They say preachers have to follow the example of secular pursuits.
And the comparison is pretty stark.
It is. Look at traders. They don't wait at home for customers. They go to the markets. They follow their customers.
Fishermen throw their nets outside their boats.
Right, into the sea, not inside the hull. In the same way, evangelists must go out after business if it will not come to them.
To stay indoors, just waiting for people who hate the very idea of church, is presented as fundamentally irrational.
It is.
But let me pause there for a second, because a listener might ask, isn't there a risk here? Framing evangelism as business, going out after business, doesn't that cheapen the spiritual nature of the commission?
That's a fair question, and I think it's one the source anticipates. It uses that term precisely because it highlights operational prudence.
Okay, so it's about method, not message.
Exactly. They are not talking about cheapening the message. They're demanding efficiency and seriousness in the method. In the secular world, if your method is failing, you change it. If your market is outside the shop, you move the shop.
Yeah.
The point isn't theological materialism, but theological realism. If souls are the profit, and the method of waiting indoors yields nothing, then waiting indoors is fiscally and spiritually irresponsible.
That really clarifies the intention. You adopt the diligence of the secular world to fulfill a divine mandate. The structure of the building itself can't be allowed to become an impediment to that obedience.
Right. And this active, mobile form of ministry is what unlocks the gospel for entire populations who are, structurally and socially excluded by the walls of the church.
Okay, so let's shift our attention. Let's move from the mandate, the why, to the specific people, the who. Who exactly are we missing by staying inside? What are these walls the church inadvertently builds?
The street corner acts as a great equalizer. That's the key.
How so?
It removes so much of the baggage, the formality, the expectation, the dress code, all the things that surround organized religion.
And the sources, they identify three very distinct groups who are reached exclusively by street preaching.
Yes, exclusively. Because the street corner eliminates their fundamental reasons for not attending church in the first place.
So the first category is dubbed the no church party. Can you describe their attitude toward a divine service?
Well, these are the folks who make a deliberate choice to skip Sunday worship. They prefer the newspaper, their pipe, and a bit of leisure.
And their aversion runs deep.
Oh, it does. They hate the very sight of our churches and meeting houses, and the psychology behind it is fascinating. They look upon attending a divine service as a sort of punishment.
A punishment. How is that perception formed? I mean, it's a very specific view.
It's a kind of psychological defense mechanism. They view church attendees as people who are, and I'm quoting here, getting off the punishment they ought to endure in the next world by suffering it in this world instead.
Wow. So to them, sitting through a sermon is like a necessary but unpleasant payment of dues?
That's it. And since they don't plan to pay those dues, they avoid the payment entirely. But, and this is the crucial part, if the message is brought to them outside, without the formality, they will stand in a crowd to hear what is said.
The removal of the institutional setting removes the perception of penalty.
Precisely. That is a brilliant insight into the psychology of resistance.
Then we have the second group, and this is a big one. Those facing barriers of suitable attire and hygiene. This is a massive practical hurdle in dense urban settings.
It is, and it's a critical point that the sources handle with a really refreshing candor.
They don't shy away from it.
Not at all. For people in great cities, the barrier is often simple economics and social norms. They have not fit clothes to worship in, according to the standard required by the existing congregations.
And if they do show up,
They're either stared at or they feel deeply uncomfortable and just out of place.
and the authors go further than just clothes, right?
Yeah.
They also discuss hygiene.
Yes, and the description is very vivid. It notes that some individuals' persons and their garments are so filthy, so odorous, so unapproachable, that they themselves would be uncomfortable in the closed, regulated air of a chapel.
So the open air is the only practical solution for them.
It is. It grants them the dignity of listening without demanding a complete and immediate social overhaul just to hear the gospel. The air is fresh, and the social pressure is lessened.
And the final category encompasses the people who are actively neglected. The lurkers, tramps, and streetwalkers.
These are the people who exist entirely outside the sphere of respectable society, and they have to be actively pursued into their own domains.
The source describes them as lurkers in the hedges, tramps on the highways, streetwalkers, and lane haunters.
Yes, and they are fundamentally missed by any conventional, static ministry. The mandate to go into the highways and hedges is interpreted literally here. It means going where the social outcasts actually reside.
Beyond these social groups, the source claims open-air ministry also achieves unique success with groups that are, well, inherently resistant or even antagonistic toward institutional Christianity.
Indeed. We find significant success among infidels and Romanists. The source observes that gracious work among those called papists is frequently commenced at street corners.
Right, and we should probably contextualize that term papists here because for a modern listener, that's a very charged word.
It absolutely is. And when we're reporting on a historical source like this, you have to understand it as a theological and cultural criticism that was common among Reformed thinkers of that era.
The critique isn't only about the people, is it?
No, it's about the method of worship, the closed, highly ritualistic setting, which the authors often associated with bad air and stifling formality.
So by saying work is commenced among them on the street.
It means that removing that traditional ritualistic setting is necessary to get that initial hearing. You have to get them outside the building first.
That provides the necessary context. Now, what about skeptics and atheists of the time? The infidels.
They are described as constantly yielding to the word of the Lord when it is brought to them directly on the street.
And what about strangers and foreigners?
Open-air preaching has been, as they say, remarkably blessed to them. There's a wonderful anecdote cited about a Jewish friend from Poland.
Oh, I remember this part.
He initially started listening to the street speakers with the objective of learning the language. He was using the preacher's clear articulation as an English lesson.
That's fascinating. So what happened?
Well, his initial educational interest turned into something spiritual. He was caught by the message while he was focusing on the grammar.
And he eventually became a converted man.
Yes, described by the author as an Israelite indeed. The open access, the public nature of it, made him vulnerable to the gospel while he was just trying to acquire a language skill.
It really speaks to the accidental conversions that can happen when the gospel is just made available everywhere. It also attracts those eccentric people.
Right, those whose belief system can neither be described nor imagined. They're religiously unique, and they often actively avoid churches, maybe seeing them as too restrictive or too simple.
But the crowd setting is less formal.
Precisely. It's far less threatening than walking into a structured assembly. They'll stand and listen in the crowd.
So the open-air evangelist is depicted as a kind of spiritual prospector, isn't he? Someone who often finds some of the richest gems among these rough individuals.
That phrase is beautiful. They're described as jewels, which by reason of their roughness are apt to be unnoticed by a more fastidious class of soul winners.
The street ministry is essential because it accommodates the roughness of the audience.
And sometimes the necessary rawness of the message itself. The refinement of the chapel tends to miss the person who requires a rougher setting to first encounter the truth.
So we have to return to that great paradox then. Since outdoor ministry is so easily justified, the critique shifts, and it focuses heavily on why indoor services require an apology.
Yes, and the central argument is that modern architectural design frequently sacrifices basic functionality, acoustics, health, and comfort purely for aesthetics and tradition.
And this critique is not shy about assigning physical blame. The source material details these structural flaws that amount to acoustic hazards for the audience and, well, a significant physical danger to the preacher.
Indeed. We have to apologize for the very elements that are considered beautiful in some traditional designs. A defense is needed for forests of stone pillars built right in the middle of the sanctuary.
They're there to support a heavy roof, but they obstruct the preacher from being seen.
And their voice from being heard clearly.
And that obstruction isn't just visual, is it? It affects the travel of sound waves. If a person is speaking and the sound hits a hard stone surface right in front of the listener.
The clarity is immediately compromised. Absolutely. The sound wave hits those surfaces and gets scattered and absorbed, forcing people to strain to hear.
But the structural failure doesn't end there.
No. Apologies are also wanted for high-pitched Gothic roofs in which all sound is lost. The grand verticality that's prized in Gothic revival architecture might look impressive, symbolizing aspiration.
But acoustically, it's a disaster. The sound just dissipates upwards.
It does. And even worse than sound dissipation is sound refraction, the willful creation of echoes.
This point really shows where the priorities lie, doesn't it?
It does. A defense is required for creating these echoes by deliberately exposing hard, sound-refracting surfaces. And why? Simply to satisfy the demands of art.
The architect is obsessed with the look of the stone or the vaulted ceiling.
And totally ignores the comfort of the audience and the speaker. Comprehension becomes a secondary concern to visual effect.
It sounds like a structural choice that is actively anti-preaching. It sacrifices the function of the spoken word for visual appeal. What is the human cost of this flaw?
The physical toll is cited as devastating. These architectural failures compel men to shout till they burst their blood vessels just to be heard over the noise loss, the echoes, the pillars.
And you compare that to the open air,
where the speaker, aided by the wind, can preach 3 or 4 times with less fatigue because the ceiling is, quote, as high as the heavens are above the earth. The architecture outdoors is just superior by definition.
Moving from sound to sensation, the environment inside the building is also heavily criticized, especially the air quality.
Yes, the source writers are not at all enamored of the bad air and the stifling stuffiness found in many indoor assemblies. They connect fresh, clean air with spiritual vitality.
And this bad air, the critique continues, makes them meeting houses.
Almost as loathsome to the nose and to the lungs as the mass houses of papists.
That comparison is intentionally visceral. It's linking poor air quality to doctrinal error or stifling ritualism.
It is. The comparison suggests that the stale, heated, poisoned air of a poorly ventilated chapel mirrors the spiritual lifelessness the authors associate with highly ritualized or formal worship.
So this stale atmosphere is seen as physically and spiritually debilitating.
It is, and it contrasts sharply with the fresh air and plenty of it found outside.
And the discomfort extends beyond the air, doesn't it? It affects the very experience of sitting and listening. Excuses are needed for the furniture.
Oh, yes. The critique targets the piece of straight-up paneling at their back, an invention of discomfort.
He's talking about traditional box pews or those stiff high-back benches.
Exactly. The design forces the listener into an unnatural, rigid posture. It's an invention designed for long, formal reverence, maybe, but certainly not for attentive, comfortable engagement with a long sermon.
The author suggests this discomfort.
Ought long ago to have made people prefer to worship outside on the green grass.
Beyond the physical toll and the lack of comfort, the source material condemns the misplaced financial and aesthetic priorities of building these lavish structures.
Yes, apologies are wanted for architects who pile up brick and stone into the skies, building these massive, costly steeples and ornate facades when there is so much need for preaching rooms among poor sinners down below.
It's a scathing critique of extravagance that ignores evangelical necessity.
It is. Resources are being diverted from ministry outreach to, well, construction vanity.
And this vanity shows up in the ornamentation itself.
Absolutely. A decent excuse is needed for the childish people who must needs waste money in placing hobgoblins and monsters on the outside of their preaching houses.
He means things like gargoyles and other strange, non-scriptural decorative elements.
Yes. And for having other ridiculous pieces of popery stuck up both inside and outside, which the author states deface rather than to adorn.
So the suggestion is that money and effort are spent on distracting, non-functional, or even superstitious decoration rather than on clarity and utility.
That's the argument.
So we have this clear, multi-layered structural case against the building. It obstructs the message, it compromises health, it wastes resources, and it prioritizes fleeting aesthetics over functional utility. Given all that, what is the one single factor that excuses indoor assemblies at all?
Well, the only mitigating factor mentioned is the execrably bad climate in England.
Ah, the weather.
The weather. It's the one external variable the preacher can't control. But even with the weather as a justification, the authors conclude that a comfortable, well-ventilated structure is very rarely met.
So even with the rain, the fields and commons often remain the default, functionally superior choice for ministry.
That's the position they take.
Okay, so if the preacher moves from that fixed, formal indoor environment to the rough, changing crowd of the street, the style of speaking has to change completely.
It has to.
We're moving from a sustained, reasoned argument to something more intense, more immediate, focus on maximum impact.
This shift is mandatory for survival. The structure of your thought has to be intensely disciplined because the street audience is fluid, they're distracted, and they're inherently critical.
They just will not tolerate the verbose, meandering style that's often tolerated in a captive congregation.
Not for a second.
And that brings us to the structure of thought, which the source describes as bullets, not chains.
Yeah.
The thinking must be intense, condensed, and concentrated from start to finish.
Verbosity is not admired, and the street critics serve as immediate editors, ready to admonish, cut it short, old boy.
And the source makes a key distinction here. It's not just long words they hate.
No, it's saying nothing at extreme length. The street preacher can't afford the luxury of establishing context over 20 minutes. They must say something and have done with it and go on to say something more.
And the adaptation that separates street rhetoric from chapel rhetoric is self-sufficiency. Why must each point be complete in itself?
Because the audience is constantly changing. A person might walk up to the edge of the crowd, listen for 5 minutes, and then move on.
And if the second point of your sermon depends on the first,
the person who just arrived hears only fragmented nonsense. Every truth proclaimed has to be portable, understandable, and capable of generating conviction without reference to the preceding 15 minutes of discourse.
This fundamentally alters the art of rhetorical preparation. It's the difference between a sophisticated, connected argument and a series of powerful declarations.
Yes. The typical chain of thought must be taken to pieces, and each link melted down and turned into bullets.
That's a great analogy.
It is. A chain of thought is elegant. You lead the listener link by link to the conclusion. A bullet is immediate, self-contained, and delivers force on impact.
The preacher needs something forceful.
Like Coeur de Lion's battle axe to break a bar of iron. Short, forceful truth, rather than an elegant saber for delicate, sustained reasoning.
That metaphor, the battle axe, really captures the necessary force. And the delivery has to match this directness. Pacing is critical.
It is, especially in a dense city. The preacher must come to the point at once and come there with all your might. There's just no time for throat clearing.
And speed is a tactical advantage. The source warns that in a London street, the preacher must go ahead or someone else.
Another street speaker, a vendor, maybe a heckler might run off with your congregation.
It's the competition for attention at work.
Right. A quick, short, sharp address is most adapted for a passing company who have no initial inclination to stop. You have seconds to hook them.
It seems counterintuitive, then, that the sources warn against incessant bawling. I think the image most of us have of a street preacher is someone shouting desperately over the noise.
And that is the essential insight here. Constant shouting, or ranting, prevents the preacher from laying proper emphasis on the telling passages. If you're always loud, you have nowhere to go when you need true solemnity or urgency.
So what's the alternative?
The author suggests that the quiet, penetrating conversational style would seem to be the most telling.
Why does quiet conversation work better in a hostile environment?
Because it demands attention differently. It separates the preacher from the noise of the market and the rant of the madman. When men plead in deepest earnestness, they often use less wind and a little more rain, less rant and a few more tears.
This controlled, earnest demeanor is the preacher's best rhetoric.
It is. It signals sincerity rather than just agitation.
And what about the content itself? When you strip away all the academic formality, what has to remain?
The core message has to be crystal clear. The constant rule is to keep to your subject and preach Christ or nothing. That focused proclamation is the entire justification for the effort.
And this focus eliminates all the academic baggage that might be tolerated indoors.
It does. The preacher must actively avoid those verbose, word-spinning introductions about the text's academic aspects or its position in the analogy of the faith.
That highly formalized, structured introduction is met with instant derision in the street.
Oh, immediately. The audience has no patience for theological meandering or displays of learning. The source warns that such attempts are met with shouts like, "Go on, old buffer," or a sarcastic, "Amen."
They want the central, saving truth delivered with force.
They do. And the source suggests that if a speaker were to acquire a style fully adapted to a street audience, he would be wise to bring it indoors with him because that condensed, forceful delivery is superior in every context.
Okay, so that unique oratory style is only half the necessary adaptation. The street environment demands a specific character, a specific temperament from the preacher.
Yes, a resolute, good-natured disposition is necessary to handle a rough, unpredictable, and often hostile audience.
And that temperament is crucial for maintaining control and respect. The preacher must be always courteous and good-tempered. What's the consequence if the preacher fails in this?
The source gives a strong warning. If the preacher becomes cross or angry, it is all over with you.
Losing your temper is losing the argument.
Yes, it invites immediate ridicule and undermines any spiritual authority. Good temper is the necessary shield that keeps the message separate from the messenger's frustration.
And this demeanor must be supported by practical, manly mannerisms. What kind of presentation works best?
The action must be purely natural and unconstrained. The preacher should avoid stiffness or mimicking the affected mannerisms of famous ministers or striking a wild, raving maniac action.
Overwrought drama looks ridiculous on a street corner.
It does, and they must consciously shed anything that smacks of clerical superiority.
Right. They have to abandon the affectation of superiority, along with primness, demureness, formality, and sanctimonious long-windedness.
All of which are guaranteed to invite derision. The less like a parson the preacher appears, in that popular sense of a stuffy, isolated figure, the better.
And if they are known to be a minister?
Then they must even more show yourself to be a man, the better. They need to appear relatable and grounded, not aloof.
So once that demeanor is established, the inevitable opposition arrives. How should the preacher use wit and wisdom to engage the hecklers?
The primary tool is often humor and quick thinking. The sources state, a little mother wit is often the best resource and will work wonders with a crowd.
And good humor or bonhomie?
Is described as the next best thing to grace on such occasions. It disarms and creates a connection with the broader neutral part of the crowd.
But the main instruction is to shun debate as much as possible with real skeptics. Why is that avoidance strategy recommended?
Because the goal is proclamation, not argument. And it's certainly not about gratifying the skeptic's ego.
And if an honest objector appears?
They are best conversed with alone, away from the cheering crowd, where they are not ashamed to admit they might be wrong. Debating publicly often just validates the heckler and diverts attention from the gospel.
But when a heckler is disrupting the meeting, tactical brilliance is required. Let's expand on that anecdote of the infidel on Kennington Common.
This is a textbook example of using wit to dismantle an opponent in front of an audience. The infidel was disrupting the service by loudly extolling the beauties of nature.
He was going on and on about natural forces and creation, trying to dismiss the supernatural God.
Right. And the preacher, instead of getting angry or arguing theology, simply asked him to define the term he was using so confidently.
Yeah, what was the result?
The heckler was completely stumped. He stammered, nature, nature is nature. He'd been using a loaded term as a weapon without understanding what it even meant.
And the crowd laughed.
They did. They immediately understood the folly of his position, and the infidel subsided. It's effective crowd control by exposing intellectual hypocrisy, not through theological complexity.
That's a lesson in brevity and focusing on the opponent's weak spot. And there's another tactic mentioned for dealing with ignorant antagonists. Let it have rope enough.
Exactly. The preacher must not enlighten ignorant antagonists or supply them with ammunition for future encounters. If the antagonist makes a foolish statement, let the foolishness stand. Don't correct their theology or their factual error, because that just equips them to spread better-informed skepticism later on.
The goal is silence and diffusion, not the education of the opponent.
Right.
We also have to acknowledge the very real physical hazards of street perching. This is a genuinely dangerous environment.
It is. Preachers must expect brickbats and flower pots. The source details the specific risk of preaching with a wall behind you.
You risk receiving scalding water or, well, unsavory contents dumped from upper windows.
Yes, the wall, which might seem like a barrier for safety, actually becomes a source of extreme vulnerability.
And the risk of theft is also noted, even during a sacred act like prayer.
That's the reality of the environment. If a speaker prays with their eyes closed, they risk having their Bible, hat, and umbrella stolen right off the ground.
So prudence dictates that a companion should accompany the speaker.
Yes, specifically to watch their back and their belongings while one prays, recognizing the predatory nature of the surroundings.
And yet, even this physical opposition can sometimes be turned to good.
It's strange, but yes. The sources mention the benefit of persecution. Getting locked up by the police actually generates sympathy for the message among the people.
The public respects a man who endures hardship.
They do. They respect someone who gets into legal trouble trying to communicate a helpful message to them. Persecution validates the sincerity of the preacher in the eyes of the common person.
Street evangelism really is a refining fire then. It demands not only theological clarity, but also immense practical wisdom, physical resilience, and emotional control.
It certainly does.
Okay, so let's move finally to the practical reality. Success outside hinges on common sense and the strategic use of geography and the environment. You can have the perfect message, the perfect temperament, but if you ignore natural logistics, you will fail.
Prudence in acoustics is an essential qualification. The sources warn immediately about the wind.
What's the rule?
Never try to preach against the wind, for it is an idle attempt. The speaker will have to eat your own words. The sound just blows straight back into your face, making it painful and ineffective.
So the strategic necessity is to position yourself so that the wind carries your voice.
Exactly. Preach so that the wind carries your voice towards the people. This simple strategy allows the voice to project naturally for half a mile or more. The wind is a free amplifier. Ignoring it is foolish.
Choosing the right terrain can also create a massive natural acoustic advantage.
It can. The ideal terrain capitalizes on natural geometry. The preacher should prefer to front a rising ground or a hillside.
Why is that?
These are described as favorite spots because the congregation can be seated in rising galleries on the banks above the speaker. It creates a natural amphitheater effect.
And these natural sites are highly valued historically, aren't they?
Oh, they are. We look at examples like Wesley's famous preaching spot at Gwinnett Pit, which used this natural bowl or amphitheater shape.
There's another site mentioned at Benmore.
Right, at Benmore, where the rising terraces were covered with fir trees, allowing the congregation to sit comfortably on the grassy banks, dropping down toward the speaker. It's perfect human geometry for maximum hearing.
This preference for natural architecture leads to a beautiful anecdote about the famous preacher C.H. Spurgeon's personal experience.
Yes, Spurgeon described his experience in Witchwood Forest as encountering the beau ideal of a preaching place.
What did he find there?
He found a cleared spot where young oaks were left to form pillars and arches, creating this magnificent temple not made with hands. He saw that natural arrangement as superior to any man-made structure he had ever seen.
He's emphasizing that nature provides the grandest, most functional sanctuary.
He is, but there are also locations and conditions that, even outdoors, must be avoided entirely due to acoustic interference.
This interference can be environmental.
It can. Preachers are warned to avoid the neighborhood of the Normandy poplar tree. The leaves of this tree cause a perpetual hissing and rustling sound.
Which is described as almost like the noise of the sea.
Yes, and it's known to drown out the best of voices. Even nature can sabotage the spoken word if you're not careful.
And beyond sound, physical stability is a concern.
You have to avoid unstable ground or structures. The source specifically cautions against cheddar cliffs because of the danger from falling stone moved by people sitting above.
And you should choose the ground carefully.
Avoiding swampy, rushy, or muddy areas to prevent wet feet for the hearers, which is just a practical act of courtesy that helps people pay attention.
Finally, even intended structures for outdoor gatherings are criticized. The tent is deemed a failure.
Tents are described as unutterably bad. They act as a wet blanket to the voice. The canvas and fabric, they absorb sound, they kill resonance, and they greatly increase the labor of speaking. Instead of helping, a tent increases the difficulty for both the speaker and the listener.
So the open sky is functionally preferred over canvas and wood forming.
According to the source, yes.
Before we close, let's just revisit the secondary benefit of open-air services. The benefit for the existing church attendees, the people who regularly go to chapel.
This is a crucial takeaway. The source states that the mere novelty of the place freshens interest and wakes up those who have become insensible to the most earnest addresses.
Routine, regardless of the quality of the message, breeds indifference.
It does. The mechanical routine of the chapel, where hearers become like a miller who no longer notices his own wheels turning, requires the jolt of the field or the common to restore attention.
So seeing the gospel preached outside the walls, in the place where the lost actually live, revives the interest of those who have become bored with passive indoor worship.
It wakes them up.
What we have seen today is a powerful dual argument: the necessity of the street and the failure of the structure.
That's a good way to sum it up.
On one side, we have the fulfillment of the gospel command, demanding mobility and direct confrontation with the world in the superior Heavenly Father's vast audience chamber.
And on the other, we have a clear inventory of architectural and strategic failures: stone pillars, acoustic losses, stifling air, and financial extravagance, all creating a scenario where the building itself requires an apology for impeding the very communication it was supposed to facilitate.
And the success of this demanding ministry hinges entirely on abandoning verbose formality in favor of short, self-contained, powerful truths, turning long chains of reasoning into concentrated, immediate bullets of doctrine.
Which raises a final question for you, the listener. If the success of ministry among the unreached demands the intense focus of Critoline's battle axe, a clear, forceful, self-contained truth, what does this tell us about the effectiveness of our own proclamation?
Whether we're speaking to strangers in the marketplace or to our own families at the dinner table.
Right. Are we delivering short, powerful truths that land with immediate force? Or are we engaging in an elegant, meandering argument that assumes an attention span the modern world no longer possesses?
That is something to consider as you move forward. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.